Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm Simon Flood, and I'd like to welcome you all to Pacific Edge's 2026 Annual Shareholders Meeting. I'm a recent member of the board and also assumed the position of chair in December last year. You would have, for those of you who are regular attendees at this meeting, my predecessor, Chris Gallagher, who had chaired the business for, I think, 9 years, Tony? But if he is, just want to thank him for his service to the company and to the contribution that he made to it during his time here. Before getting underway, I need to draw your attention to an important notice, which is apparently right. Do you need time to read that, or can we just we'll take it as read? And given that it's now 2:00, I can, and we have a quorum, I can declare the meeting open. I'll provide further instructions as we go through the meeting. But if you're joining us online, there is a virtual meeting guide, or you can use the helpline provided by our friends at MUFG. For those of you who are here in person, there are a couple of housekeeping points that we need to cover off. First is, if you have a mobile phone, could you please put it on silent? The restroom facilities are down the hall and to the left. And if a fire alarm goes off, the staff will tell you how to get out of here safely. I would like to introduce our directors. Anatole Masvin, who is here to my right, who chairs our Capital Committee. Anna Stove, who's to Anatole's left, who is chair of our People and Culture Committee. Brian Williams, who is up there on the far left, is there. There is Brian there. That's a surprise. Anyway, lovely to see you, Brian. Brian has got a new beard since I saw him last, but he's currently in the outback of Australia, so he's beaming into us, and Brian is deputy chair of the business. Sarah Park, to my right, and Sarah sits on a number of our committees, and Tony Barclay, who you'll be hearing more of later, chairs our Audit and Financial Risk Committee. We also have members of our senior management team. I'm sure all of you will know Pete Meintjes, and Grant Gibson, our CFO, is sitting down the back there. Our auditors, I think Nathan Wiley is online. Is that right? Yep. And we have two representatives from Harmers, Horton, Lusk, Nathaniel and Tim. Nice to see you guys. Thank you for being here. So, the meeting agenda. This is the meeting's agenda. We've got the chairman's address, which is me. I'm going to start with some comments. Then Peter will give his chief executive's address, and then we will take questions before moving on to the resolutions of the day, where we have 6 resolutions. After that, for those of you who can give us some more time, there will be an opportunity for us to mingle and enjoy some refreshments out the back. Now, I've received 2 apologies. The first is from Rosemary Stephen, and the second is from Richard Solomon. Are there any other apologies that should be recorded in the minutes? No? Okay. Now, the minutes of the previous annual shareholders meeting are available for inspection on request. They're also on the company's website. So, look, let's go to the first slide, because I wanted to spend a few moments putting Pacific Edge's current position in context, where we've been, the opportunity we have in front of us, and why we're positive about the future. I want to clearly set out what we need to do to realise what we believe to be a significant opportunity ahead of us. Now, when I joined Pacific Edge late last year, I did so because what I saw, in very simple terms, was a company that had assembled something that is actually quite rare and and exciting in a sector that I have strong affinity with. Patented, non-invasive tests with proven clinical utility, a substantial and expanding evidence base, a recognised patient and healthcare system need, and a meaningful global opportunity. I also believe that, and there's been a lot talked about the Medicare process, that while challenging, would ultimately recognise the value that Pacific Edge's CX bladder products offer, and that is also recognised by the urologists community, both here and in the US. Now, the draft local coverage determination, and we'll refer to that as an LCD, was published by the Medicare Administrative Contractor, Novitas, in May. And that proposes that Medicare coverage for both CX Bladder Triage and the successor product Triage Plus. Now, our test for the evaluation of patients presenting with hematuria or blood in the urine. Now, importantly, those are the only biomarkers proposed to be reimbursable under this policy, and that gives us a tremendous opportunity relative to our competition. Now, this is a company-defining milestone and a significant validation of our evidence-led strategy, and it's a major step forward to an opportunity worth, in revenue terms, and you'll see it up there in the top left of that chart, US $10.2 billion. Now, the draft LCD is good to have. It's a huge step forward, and it's a hard-won recognition for the years of work put in by our team, led by Peter. But it is a draft, and disciplined execution remains essential as we wait for the confirmation of a final LCD, which we hope to receive before the end of this year. The difference that the draft LCD makes is that it gives Pacific Edge a clearer reimbursement pathway and a legitimacy that confirms CX Bladder as the leader in its field. And that's a great place for us to start rebuilding our sales momentum. Bladder cancer diagnosis often begins with the evaluation of the causes of hematuria, and there are millions of hematuria evaluations carried out each year in the US. CX Bladder is designed to help identify hematuria patients at a low risk of cancer. Now, properly used, it will ensure that patients are able to receive an accurate diagnosis that was previously only available if the patient underwent a cystoscopy. And that's a procedure that many have chosen to avoid because it's invasive, it's uncomfortable, and at times quite painful. Now, the risk stratification of patients by clinicians also ensures that the higher risk patients continue through the appropriate pathway, which has then been freed up by the redirection of those low risk and intermediate risk patients, which is where Triage and Triage Plus come in. That delineation of care is valuable for patients, it's valuable for clinicians, and it saves money for the healthcare system as a whole. As a company, Pacific Edge is now better positioned to pursue that opportunity than it was 12 months ago when you may have been meeting here with the board and management. The draft LCD deepens the commercial and scientific moat around the business, and the inclusion of the successor product, Triage Plus, also introduces the potential for improved economics. Now, growing the commercial payer support in the US from what effectively amounts to a validation of our products by the draft LCD will in turn support growth in other markets such as the Asia Pacific, which often look to the US for direction. And we continue to see good progress in the Asia Pacific. So we just jump to the next slide, and I'm not, you'll be pleased to know, going to go through all of it for you, but bring you up to date with the far right. Now, Pacific Edge's progress has been the result of a long and deliberate journey, building evidence, establishing diagnostic operations in New Zealand and the US, launching the CX bladder products, securing early commercial use, and working over many years to embed our tests into clinical practice. For a diagnostics company, adoption is earned through evidence, demonstrated clinical utility, better patient pathways, and the confidence of clinicians and payers. That hard work has been done. The achievements of the last 2 years have been significant markers on that journey, and they include the groundbreaking Strata study that established the clinical utility of CX bladder triage, the inclusion of that test in the American Urological Association guideline in 2025, the resounding support for the test expressed by the Contractor Advisory Committee, which was convened by Novitas in February of this year, and now the draft LCD. Together, they have endorsed our strategy of placing thoroughly researched and validated clinical evidence at the heart of value creation. Those elements also give us a highly credible pathway to convert market access into growth and, over time, profitability. Now, as shareholders will be well aware, the journey has not been linear. The Medicare non-coverage period was a serious challenge for the business, and I want to thank our shareholders for sticking with us through those challenging times. But the long-term direction of travel is clear. The company has continued to build evidence, protect its intellectual property, and develop products with the potential to improve the standard of care in bladder cancer diagnostics. That was also the basis for my own conviction. I am aligned with shareholders, not only as chair, but as someone who chose to invest in the company. I have done so alongside my fellow directors and the management and the broader team because we believe that the opportunity is real, the evidence is increasingly recognised, and the company now has a pathway to create shareholder and stakeholder value. So let's move to the next slide. The financial results reflect the impact of the Medicare non-coverage. Commercial test volumes and operating revenue were down, and the company recorded a large net loss. Still, as I've highlighted, FY26 was a year of strategic delivery. Pacific Edge preserved its core assets, it managed its costs carefully, it reduced cash burn in the second half, and completed a capital raise to support the next phase of strategy, which is all about delivery and growth. Now, most importantly, FY26 delivered the draft LCD. The company also built the commercial payer momentum in the States, while Asia Pacific has continued to advance through clinical pathway adoption and commercial progress. These developments broaden the opportunity beyond Medicare alone. Triage Plus also improves the outlook, and it was gratifying to see Triage Plus included alongside Triage in the draft LCD. It has higher performance, and the Medicare price create the potential to improve revenue per reimbursed tests, improve margins, and the company's path to profitability. Surveillance Plus remains an important future opportunity with further clinical validation and reimbursement steps ahead. So we are in a materially different and stronger position than we were a year ago. So look, the message I wanted to leave shareholders with is this. Pacific Edge has been through a difficult period, but while it has been navigating those choppy waters, it has not stood still. It has protected and strengthened the foundations of the business. And as chair and as a member of the board, I am and we are excited about the future of the business. I'm also realistic about the execution required. We will continue to be measured, disciplined and transparent. And I believe that the company can now convert its first mover position, clinical evidence and product innovation into meaningful value for patients, the healthcare system and shareholders. So as I said before, look, I want to thank you. I'm an investor by training. I know what it's like being in a company where the share price is is volatile. So I want to thank you for your ongoing patience and support. I also want to thank the Pacific Edge team, led by Peter, for their commitment. Our professional advisors, HHL, who are here today, and the clinical community whose engagement has helped us bring the company to this important point. I'm now going to hand over to Peter, who's going to speak in more detail about the company's operational progress, commercial priorities, and outlook. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you to all of you for coming this afternoon. I'm Dr. Peter Meintjes, and I will be talking about all those priorities Simon just mentioned. Next slide. So I wanted to start, though, by reminding everybody about how we create value for shareholders. And we create value in 3 pillars. Our top pillar is adoption, retention, and revenue generation, which are the activities that we're focused on in the near term to drive shareholder value. A core discipline of Pacific Edge is our evidence, coverage, and guidelines. This is our second pillar, and we generate fantastic clinical evidence through a rigorous evidence generation program as part of Pillar 2, so that we can develop coverage, medical policy, and guidelines off the back of the strength of that evidence. And our third pillar is research, development, and innovation. These are the activities that we undertake to drive shareholder value over the long term. Next slide. So how have we advanced various priorities against those 3 pillars of value over the last year? And in our view, strong execution on evidence pillar has underpinned our future commercial success. We have a draft LCD, as Simon has talked about, supporting Medicare coverage of Triage and Triage Plus that we are expecting will be final and effective before the end of this year. Our clinical evidence generation program is something that is ongoing, and the focus of that evidence generation program right now is to extend the thresholds between intermediate risk and high risk patients so that we can have more inclusion of more patients eligible for CX bladder testing to deliver our tests to a larger serviceable market. As we think about the near term with adoption, retention, and revenue generation, our US commercial testing has stabilized, and you'll see some data on that in a coming slide. But we are expecting that off the back of the work that we have already done with the draft coverage in place and with the final coming towards the end of the year, that our expectations are set to rise. In the meantime, though, we have pushed ahead on multiple fronts, including medical policy wins with US commercial payers, which have been increasing through this year. And we now have over 10.5 million lives covered with commercial medical policy for CX bladder triage. And in the APAC region, we've been focusing towards operating profitably on a direct cost basis, and it has been really pleasing to see test throughput increase, the proportion of commercial tests of total tests increasing, the average sales price increasing, and most recently, since the launch of Triage Plus, the product mix shifting towards increasing levels of Triage Plus, which creates a greater margin and margin percentage for our business. And in the long term, we're driving long-term enterprise value with product improvements and new products through our research, development, and innovation. The most recent milestone for that came last year with $1,328 price established for Triage Plus. And as we look towards the future, we are targeting a $1,800 price for Surveillance Plus. When we achieve these milestones, the value delivered by research, development, and innovation will improve the unit economics that we can focus on in our first pillar as we drive revenue. Next slide. So a little bit more detail on what Novitas has actually proposed. And again, I'm more than happy to take a range of questions on this at the end of the session. But the finalized LCD is expected to accelerate our path to profitability because we didn't have one before. And importantly, Triage and Triage Plus have both been proposed for Medicare coverage. And as Simon also highlighted, there are no other urine-based biomarker tests that have been proposed for Medicare coverage. Final and effective coverage is expected before the end of the year and move forward, I think. And final LCD expected to catalyze reimbursement and testing volume. And if you can complete the slide. Thank you. And our immediate focus as a business is to improve the unit economics of operating a frontline sales team. And so what does that mean? That means making sure that the number of tests that one sales rep is able to reliably generate for our business increases from where it is today in ways that start to pay back the costs to the business, giving us operating leverage for the future. We want to shift our customer base from Triage to Triage Plus because we get paid more per test, because it is at a higher margin with a higher margin percentage, but also because this is the most accurate test and it is what's best for physicians and it's what's best for patients. Importantly, we are seeking to ensure payment success on more than 80% on commercial tests by operating only in the areas where we have a reliable history of commercial success or existing medical policy and in the future contracting. Next slide. So a reminder of the total market that we're chasing here. The market opportunity is substantial, 10.2 billion at full global TAM. We're currently focused on the US market, and of course, that total global TAM figure is driven by the 6.4 billion in the US market, where we have a higher test price and a substantial testing volume. And specifically, we're targeting the low, the intermediate, the high risk, and the gross hematuria with our Triage Plus product. And in the surveillance setting for non-muscle invasive bladder cancer patients, with an $1,800 price for Surveillance Plus, we'll be targeting the 750,000 patients that are annually on a surveillance protocol. And we expect that those patients will be surveilled 1 to 2 times per year using a tool like Surveillance Plus to drive that TAM. Now, what we also know is that our current indication is only for intermediate risk. And so right now, our serviceable market is smaller than our TAM, but we expect to expand that over time, and that is one of the near-term focuses of the business. Next slide. So how are we doing that? Well, we're driving the expansion of the indications that we have through our clinical evidence generation program. The studies in yellow that you can see here, these are the studies that have already been published. The studies in green are the important upcoming studies that will drive the expansion of the market from intermediate risk to low, intermediate, and high risk. The way we will do that is through a series of sub-analyses on the different populations within the microhematuria patients and include gross hematuria patients. And with that, we will be able to publish convincing clinical evidence that the serviceable market should be expanded to include all-risk microhematuria patients. So to summarize there, collectively, these studies are expected to redefine the AUA risk categories for a greater serviceable market. Next slide. Other parts of our evidence generation system, but not part of our core evidence generation program, are the independent studies that supplement our evidence portfolio. These are a great way to keep ourselves in the headlines. These are high-impact research at low cost, driven by the customers that we work most closely with. While only one of these studies has been published, and there's been a few delays behind the second one, we're optimistic and that the first ever patient preference and patient satisfaction study of biomarkers versus cystoscopy will be published within the next quarter. It has been submitted, and this is in partnership with excellent researchers at the Mayo Clinic in the United States. So investigator-initiated trials across the spectrum here are targeted at extending the evidence portfolio and keeping Pacific Edge in the news at conferences. And they are an important part of our key opinion leader engagement program, and how and why our key opinion leaders support Pacific Edge in return. Next slide. So having a quick look at our commercial performance over the last year. And it is simply a fact our performance in terms of test throughput has declined over the year. However, over the last 3 quarters, we have observed that it has stabilized, and we are delighted with that achievement. As our sales force has declined, this means that we have been able to improve the sales force efficiency as the number of FTEs in our sales force is lowered, while maintaining the same level of throughput. The next steps from here are focused on the lower graph. So what you can already see is that we were able to successfully change the ordering behavior of our physicians from using Detect to using Triage. And that transition is no small feat. But we have another one, and a more important one, coming up. That one was done under duress. The next one is planned, and we are planning to shift all of our customers from using Triage to using Triage Plus. And that won't be immediate. Some of our customers are contracted to use Triage and will be using it for some period of time. Some states, like New York State, we do not yet have approval for Triage Plus. It requires a separate approval. But overall, we are transitioning our customers from Triage to Triage Plus, and you will see it manifest here in the product mix. And this is how you will know we will have an increasing ASP. We'll be driving up our margins, and we'll be driving up our margin percentage for greater commercial success. Next slide. So just to talk through what is our near-term commercial strategy with draft Medicare coverage. We do believe that draft Medicare coverage is a fantastic milestone, final obviously being more important, but what are we doing while we have draft and before we have final? So importantly, we have to look at the words of the draft, and we have to focus on Triage Plus, and we have to focus on intermediate risk microhematuria patients. So we are configuring our sales operations around the intermediate risk patients. What does this mean? As we look to try to reduce our cash burn, we've got to be able to identify the call points with high numbers of intermediate risk patients and migrate customers to Triage Plus. If you could just go forward all through the slide, thank you. We're going to be targeting the intermediate risk microhematuria patients because many of those patients are female. And in the bottom right corner, you can see that the vast majority of low-risk patients are female. The vast majority of the intermediate risk patients are female. And as a consequence, we need to find those female-specific call points, and many of those are women's health providers. Examples of those women's health providers are URPS, Urogyn's, OBGYNs, and FPMRS. We have helpfully included expansions of all those acronyms down the bottom in the footnote, but those are all important subspecialties of urology that see more women. Other important targets are the systems that are integrated between primary care and secondary care, something that here in New Zealand we may take for granted. Nearly all of our care is integrated, but not so in the United States. But there are a number of what are called integrated delivery networks where primary care and secondary care are integrated, and that is a defining feature of IDNs. Another important element to this is that urologists frequently triage the intermediate risk microhematuria patients using people that are not the treating physician. So support teams in the office, the advanced practice providers, the nurse practitioners, and the physician's assistants, these are all people who might see the patient when they are lower risk before a physician would actually see them, and consequently they need to know about our test, and we need to be actively targeting them. So our commercial team, the sales teams, are focused on concentrations of demand in integrated delivery networks, which are hospital systems, academic institutions, and the Veterans Association. And Pacific Edge is making selective investments, as Simon also highlighted, aimed at growing Triage Plus volume ordered on intermediate risk microhematuria patients that have the highest chance of reimbursement success and delivering consistent revenue. Next slide. So what does the breakdown of the market look like when you think about these IDNs and these private practice urology groups? So private practice, if we actually start at the bottom here, those basically become in large and small. Large urology group practices, also called LUGPAs, often are private equity backed, they're very cost driven, and they're very procedure revenue driven. Similarly for community urology, but community urology is practiced on a much smaller scale. That's typically 1 and 2 doctor practices, and those make up around 40% of the market of private practice. And our account executives are the ones that are going to be responsible for calling on, continue to be responsible for calling on these private practice accounts and converting them from ordering on all microhematuria patients to ordering on the intermediate risk microhematuria patients. However, the larger share of the 1.14 million microhematuria intermediate risk patients are seen in an integrated environment in one of the types of IDNs, which, as I mentioned, are hospital networks, academic centres, Veterans Administration, and one particular example of an IDN is where we are already operating, which is Kaiser Permanente. And so around the country, there are around 1,000 of these strategic accounts, including 130 academic centres, 170 VA medical centres, nested within 18 VISNs, which is how the Veterans Administration is broken up. These are typically characterised by, 1, the integration between primary care and secondary care, 2, a capitated system of managing patients, and 3, the adoption of clinical pathways. And it is this opportunity of clinical pathways and pathway-based medicine that allows us to pivot our sales process from selling tests to physicians to selling pathways to institutions. And while this is a longer sales cycle, the upside is clear. When you have implemented a protocol at an institution, your revenue is stickier, and patients and physicians are able to more clearly adhere to that pathway than with individual decision-making on its own. Next slide. Another important component is not where the ordering happens, but who's going to pay for it. So we have multiple customers, which is often difficult to explain. Multiple customers for a given test. There's the person who orders the test, which is the physician. There's the patient who receives the test, or the person who receives the test, which is the patient. And then there's the person who pays for the test, which is the insurance company. These are called commercial payers. And with Medicare policy, we are expecting that there are fewer barriers to adoption by the commercial payers, and commercial payers are actually the larger market opportunity because there are 223 million lives insured by commercial payers, contrasted with only 66 million lives insured by Medicare across the system. So commercial payers cover almost 4 times more lives than Medicare. Intermediate risk microhematuria patients skew younger, female, and importantly, commercially insured. Final coverage from Medicare is expected to unlock revenue from commercial payers by removing a key reason to deny reimbursement. Currently, commercial payers might look at a test and say, it's not covered by Medicare, I don't have to cover you either. That is changing, and that is powerful. Providing additional evidence to overturn denials on appeal is another thing that we can do. If a commercial payer does choose to deny us, we can provide additional evidence in the form of Medicare draft policy to improve our appeals success. And because these are written documents published online, private payers can go and read those policies. Their medical policy teams can, if they're efficient, cut and paste the existing policy, modify it to suit their specific needs, but they're able to leverage that existing language in their own policies. And then finally, there has been an initiative through the American Cancer Society for many years to create what are called state biomarker laws. And although state biomarker laws are in their infancy, state biomarker laws do say that if Medicare covers your test, commercial payers are expected to pay for that test. And that provides us with extra legal avenues to pursue commercial payers in certain states that are respecting those state biomarker laws. Next slide, please. A little bit on APAC. So we're quite buoyed by our progress in APAC. It is small, but it is significant. We haven't faced the same level of headwinds, and we are showing that we can chart a path to profitability. So if we look, the volumes are smaller than they are in the US, but we have been able to see quarter-on-quarter growth for the last 5 quarters, which is really fantastic. But the thing that I'm most, the thing that I'm actually most excited about in APAC is the same thing that I was talking about on the US slides. It's about the transition to new products where the test price is higher, the margin is higher, the margin percentage is higher. And what we can already see is that where we haven't faced market headwinds, that we have shifted from 0 to 1% adoption for Triage Plus, we have shifted to 7.6% over a quarter, and that is just the immediate impact since launch. Nearly all of that is, around 60% of that 7.6 is ex-New Zealand, showing that that is an increasingly important segment of our market from a geographic standpoint as well. So APAC proves the rest of the world concept. And we can replicate this in other markets where we do not currently operate, but we're proving the model. We can replicate it in the Middle East, the UK, Europe, but we do need to continue our path for RUO and IVD development. Next slide. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit about our third pillar and how we generate value with research, development, and innovation over the long term. Because our next generation products, we've been working on them for a long time, but they are already delivering strategic value. And I've talked a bit about the headline here. Of course, it's about revenue, margin percentage. And Triage Plus is the future of our hematuria evaluation. For Triage Plus, we have analytical validation complete, clinical validation complete, a price of $1,328 per test for Medicare, draft coverage proposed by Novitas, and we are seeking over the next several months, more likely time frame is mid-2027, we are seeking to have Triage Plus added to the AUA guidelines and to expand the definition of AUA guidelines themselves. This builds a substantial moat around our hematuria evaluation business. Surveillance Plus is in a slightly earlier stage of development. The markers have been validated, and we are working simultaneously on publishing our analytical validation and our clinical validation, which we expect to publish early in FY28. Surveillance Plus has completed its freedom to operate, and provisional patenting is in process. We are targeting to make submissions for Surveillance Plus mid-next year, with a view of being paid and generating early revenue from 2028. That is a 6-month delay over what we previously announced to the market. But this does allow us to have additional revenue coming into the business during FY28 while seeking the crosswalk price and while seeking coverage on an LCD from Novitas. In parallel to those activities for our US testing services, we are also advancing IVD development for international markets. And while these programs are in a prototype phase and a plan is in place to be ready to implement subject to budget approval, the opportunity is real. Our international markets, we can build one kit that, by differentiating the labeling and working with different suppliers in each or different partners in each of those markets, we can access all of those markets simultaneously. Of course, we choose to do them one by one and on a prioritized basis, but the opportunity that we have to enter those markets is based on a single product line differentiated by labels. So Pacific Edge is simplifying its test to create a Triage Plus IVD product, and that will allow us to go into these international markets with a decentralized lab deployment approach for international market expansion. It is worth noting that this is, when contrasted with the United States, that is lower margin and lower revenue per test. But it is also a substantial untapped and nascent market for us as a global diagnostics company, where it is important for us to establish a footprint. So our key objectives are establishing an IVD regulatory framework. This is deeper than the CAP-clear LDT framework that we currently operate in the United States, and involves IVDR, FDA, and ISO 13485 requirements. And we have already dipped our toes into that quality system by making sure our urine sampling system, the jar that our patients pee in, that has already gone through the approval process to be an IVD. Next slide, please. So, and next one. So, look, thank you very much. I just want to talk a little bit about the outlook. We are at an important point, and as Simon has already thanked you, I would like to do so myself. You as investors have kept the company going through many challenging years. Your support is deeply appreciated. We are positioned to unlock the value of that investment through upcoming commercial, clinical, and innovation milestones. In the near term, we are still pushing for case-by-case reimbursement for Triage and Triage Plus under the draft LCD. We are awaiting the final LCD published by the end of 2026. Our US customers adopting Triage at $13.28 per test and building commercial payer and medical policy momentum as we speak. We are still waiting for explicit news from Te Whatu Ora, Health New Zealand, about a national pathway, but we continue to answer their questions and respond in a formal capacity there. In the medium term, we are going to continue with our evidence generation program for the sustained strategic value that underpins our ability to commercialize. Our US commercial payer policy for Triage and Triage Plus will fundamentally drive test adoption. We're focused on the opening of the AUA guidelines sometime after the middle of 2027, and it might stay open till as late as 2028, and that is expected to expand our serviceable market. And we continue to use investigator-initiated trials to generate novel evidence for new indications. In the long term, Triage and Triage Plus deliver better patient outcomes at higher margin and improved unit economics for Pacific Edge. Surveillance Plus, targeting June next year for launch and claim-by-claim revenue, June next year for coding submission and claim-by-claim revenue from the 1st of January, seeking a higher price than we have now, and then focused on the IVD kitted products for international markets. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to taking your questions.
Thanks, Pete. Okay. How are we doing? It's kind of warm in here, isn't it? Folks, we now go, before we move to the formal resolutions, just wanted to give you and the people who are watching online the opportunity to ask questions. These are questions as they relate to the business that you've heard about from me and from Peter. They are not questions related to the resolutions. When we get to the resolutions, then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions about the resolutions. So, the only people apparently entitled to ask questions are shareholders and their proxies or representatives of the shareholders. For anyone here in the room, if you have a question, please just raise your hand. My friend at the back here will bring you a microphone. If you could then state your name, whether you're a shareholder, a proxy holder or a corporate representative, and then we will answer your question. For the shareholders attending online, you can submit questions through Ask a Question function on the virtual meeting platform. So, I'll start in the room. Does anyone have any questions of the board, of Peter, of Grant, who is sitting down the back, but he can still answer questions? Sir.
Thank you. Before I ask my question, I'd just like to record my thanks to the board for the fantastic work that's been done over the last year. It would appear that the company has never been better positioned in terms of its commercial opportunities, and I recognise the incredible work that's been done by the board and by the staff, by the senior leadership team to deliver a company that's vastly better positioned than it has been that I can recall in the last few years. My first question relates to something that I read by a prominent American commentator called Dr. Bruce Quinn, who made a point that commercial payers and Medicare contractors are more interested in clinical utility than clinical validity as a tool for unlocking coverage and payment pathways. And I guess I'd just like to ask, do you think that Pacific Edge has been able to unlock clinical utility as the key part of the equation for commercial success? And then I have a second question after that.
Pete, do you want to answer that? But for everybody listening, do you want to explain the difference between clinical utility? Yeah?
Yeah, sure. So this one, this one is working. So thank you, Aaron, for your question. Bruce Quinn is spot on, and there's kind of a long and a short answer to this. But to acknowledge Simon's question, so we generate multiple different kinds of clinical evidence. The first is analytical validation, which essentially just shows, is your test repeatable, reproducible in a laboratory? Those are the classical measures of clinical performance. Clinical validation answers a slightly different question. You use the test in a population in which a population of patients that were not part of the development test to prove that the performance characteristics you've seen are not just an artifact of the patients you developed it on or the samples you developed it on, and that it works for other patients. Clinical utility involves typically, in its gold standard form, a randomized controlled trial, which is comparing the test arm, which is what you want, which includes your new product, to a control arm, which is the standard of care, to show that there is a difference in outcomes between the control arm and the test arm, and that shows that your test has clinical utility. And that clinical utility, the pathway, the protocol that you follow, then provides a way for saying how and when a physician should use the test. Not just that the test works. So how and when does the test work, and what can you do with the outcome? So Bruce Quinn is 100% correct that is what drives payer policy, long-term value, but you have to do all of the steps to get to clinical utility. And even then, another form of clinical utility is called real-world evidence, and we also have this in the form of the Kaiser study. So just relating it back to Pacific Edge, for triage, we have the whole portfolio. For Triage Plus, we are building that whole portfolio. We have, for Triage, we have a real-world evidence study from Kaiser Permanente. We have the clinical utility trial, which was Strata, and we have all the AV and CV work necessary for maximizing that market. For Triage Plus, we have the AV and the CV. We do not yet have the clinical utility study. That is credible. But the policy for urine-based biomarkers has already been established by the clinical utility study done by Strata. Now, and maybe I will stop there, but there is nuance to it that relates to what's called the 21st Century Cures Act, which also mandates that if you have a valid test that is medically reasonable and necessary, and medically reasonable and necessary is not a direct one-to-one translation from AV, CV, CU. Medicare is expected to cover that test. But if you don't have clinical utility, how can you prove medical necessity? So there are ways that you can, and there are situations in which you can get paid. The gold standard way to make sure you get paid is a clinical utility study, is a randomized controlled trial.
Thank you. And if I may ask my second question, Mr. Chairman, it would appear that Pacific Edge has something of an 18 to 24-month moat over competing products and demonstrating clinical utility for that to draft LCD. I was just wondering whether there's any colour that you might add about the competitive landscape and the moat that you believe that Pacific Edge has them.
Yeah, look, happy to answer that one as well. And so there are a number of different companies, and always have been, that have made competing claims that they are urine-based biomarkers for the evaluation of microhematuria or for use in non-muscle invasive bladder cancer patients. And so there are some legacy technologies like NMP22, like cytology, like FISH, and there are companies like Vesica Health that has a Sure MDX product that was recently acquired by Photocure. There's another one called Oncuria, and there's another one called I think Bladder Detect, and another one out of Israel. I'm blanking on the name right now. Beg your pardon? Well, I'm not sure much about the Cepheid test, if that's really much of a competitor. But yes, there was one on that platform as well at one point. But what's important to recognise here is that while they might have a product that can be used in those patients, the medical policy that Medicare has established, or that Novitas has established, makes absolutely clear for the utility of use in a hematuria patient when the goal is to omit a cystoscopy. There are only two technologies that can be used, and they are Triage and Triage Plus. And so that's where you can have, there are a number of different technologies that can then work in these patients, but the ones for that utility that are validated for that utility are only Cxbladder products. Whether there's an 18 to 24 month time horizon for somebody else to produce equivalent evidence is something that is for up to them. We'll see whether they can hit their deadlines. I am aware that one of those companies has made announcements and expects to have a last patient in their study in mid-2027, which is roughly 12 months from now. And if they are able to quickly write that up and publish it, it could be 6 to 12 months from that point. So, competition is possible. But competition is also a validation that what we're doing is important and valued by our customers. If they think there's a spot for somebody second in the market, you can be damn certain there's a spot for us at first, and we should look to dominate. So,
I think the other bit you might want to sort of comment on that is the perspective of the American Urological Association and the product that they recommend.
Yes, thank you, Simon. The AUA have it always helps me to remember the specifics. It's table 5 in section 13 of the microhematuria AUA guidelines, and it has 8 entries in it. Of those, 2 are Pacific Edge entries, Triage and Resolve, which is surprising that Resolve was included. But while there were a couple of other tests included, only Triage had grade A clinical evidence supporting it. So again, the clinical utility is what drives the A recommendation versus the C, which is what was recommended for all the competing tests and legacy tests.
Done. Any other questions? Now, Grant, do we have some questions for online?
Right, we'll start at the top. So the first one is from Andrew Ott. Thanks, Andrew. The 2026 capital raise, you raised an additional 12.1 million over what the amount that you targeted. Will this now enable you to continue with the development of your kit-based IVD tests, which you had previously said would be temporarily put on hold? And are you able to provide any colour on how your plans are now being altered given the additional capital?
Why don't I start off with that, and I'll get Pete to sort of follow up with the specifics on the IVD. Look, the capital raise was probably more successful than we had thought going into it, obviously spurred by the issuing of the draft LCD right in the middle of the raise, and that was sort of both good news and bad news, because we had sort of a story of two halves. But what we had a successful raise of circa $36 million. And that's great. We are still in cash burn as a business. And one of the things that the board and I, particularly Tony with his audit and risk hat on, work very closely with Pete and Grant on is the level of our cash burn and the length of our runway. What we're doing as a business is we're making selective investments to support management in growing our sales both in the US and in Asia, because we recognise from the question from Aaron before, in terms of competition never sleeps. We have been afforded an advantage by the draft LCD, and we need to capitalise on that. So we need to invest to get ourselves in a position to build sales momentum when that draft LCD is confirmed, and that's something that we have no control over. So one thing, my dad had an expression that he'd rather be mean than poor, and basically that meant he had short arms and deep pockets. Yeah, and I have inherited similar genes. So we want to make sure that the money that we are spending has a direct connection to sales. Yeah, we recognise that cash is finite. Shareholder cash is very, very important to us, and how we spend it is something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. But what I'd like to believe is that shareholders have invested in us and entrusted the board and management to make this company grow. And last year was a strategically very significant year in the history of this business, and it sets us up well, competitively and scientifically, to actually drive sales once the LCD goes from a draft to a confirmed LCD. So we are looking at that. Product strategy is something that will figure in that, but also is sort of geographic representation, how we work with the commercial payers, Medicare, the Veterans Association, how we roll out in Asia. It's a complicated jigsaw, and IVD is one of the things that we talk about, and Pete, you might want to put a little bit more colour on that.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. So, look, what I think is just important to also characterise for investors is even though we took over subscriptions from the original intent, there's not a one-to-one mapping between that and turning on some of the programs that we turned off. As Simon has articulated, and I have also articulated, we are going through a process of selective investments, which is and reevaluating which of those things turn on. So just because we raised more capital doesn't mean we turn on all the things we turned off. That we want to make clear. But in terms of the priorities of IVDs, they are a topic of active discussion. Per the slides that I had, we have a prototype, and we have a developmental plan that we are ready to execute, and we also have a forum agreed between board and management about how we will bring proposals from management to board, discuss them and approve them, and we are scheduled to discuss things in more detail, IVD being among the highest priorities, at a strategy session that we will have during October. So I probably wouldn't elaborate beyond that. Yeah.
Thanks. Grant.
I'll actually just do a follow-up question to that from Kashik Patel. So they have asked what the current cash burn rate, and we cannot confirm what that is. We cannot state what that is at the moment for disclosure reasons. But they wanted to know whether we are going to come back to the market for additional capital.
I'm not sure how you answer that. There's certainly no plans at the moment to come back to the market for additional capital. We had a successful cash raise. We have enough money in the bank to sustain operations and make selective opportunities. And as you sort of build sales momentum, you build more cash in the business. And at the moment, we're all equity financed. Equity, speaking as an investor, is an expensive way of thinking about running a business. So as we become more mature, as we get a bigger top line, we can review the way that we finance the business. I would not rule out a capital raise at some point in time in the future, but at the moment it is not under active discussion.
Great, thank you. This question comes from Stephen Mayne. It's a bit of a change in focus. Could the new chair, Simon Flood, please comment on the biggest changes in board process, delegations, reporting lines or governance that is implemented since taking over as chair in December? And then following that, could CEO Peter Meintjes also comment as to whether Simon is more or less hands-on than his predecessor? So putting you both on the spot.
You better be careful how you answer that, yeah? And I'm not sure what the right answer is. Look, I inherited, and as I said at the beginning, Chris, as I was being recruited, I got to know Chris a little bit, and I was obviously thrilled to be appointed to the board, but I suppose one of my disappointments in that was that as I stepped on, Chris stepped off. And he had made a great contribution to the business. In the moment that I had to get to know him, I thoroughly enjoyed his company and his professionalism. We all have sort of different approaches. I am reasonably hands-on. I'm trained as an investor and an analyst, so I like to open doors, pull out drawers, and I'm not sure I can extend that analogy. I like to ask a lot of questions, which Chris obviously didn't need to do because he knew the business much better than I did after 9 years as chair. So I ask a lot of questions. I have been very focused on cash burn, how we invest our cash, how we spend our money. I also am a strong believer in communications, and Pete and the team have been doing a good job. I hope you think they're doing a good job in terms of communicating with our shareholders. I have a very, very good and experienced board who have provided me with guidance. So it's sort of, I would say in answer to the question, that it's been a process of just gentle evolution. What I inherited was very good, and that's why we are in the position that we are in today, because of the work that has gone before. Pete, am I more or less hands-on than the previous chair?
So perhaps before I answer that, when Simon took over in December, it was less than 30 days, I think, before Simon joined me in Dunedin for a 3-day director induction program. This is something that management had been preparing for Chris to retire from Pacific Edge, and for a new chair or a new director to come in for some time. So we were quite well prepared with various documents, and much like an onboarding of someone who comes onto my executive team, we had a different style of onboarding that we had put together for Simon, in which he met all of my C-suite and some of the team in the middle management. He had the opportunity to address the company, and he had the opportunity to observe me giving my I do 4 town hall presentations to the company per year, talking about things on the inside, and he had the opportunity to observe that. So I think he was given a thorough introduction, and he could induction to the company's operations quite early on in his tenure, putting him in a good position to be successful as chair. That's part of the responsibility that myself, on behalf of management and the directors, all share whenever a new director comes on board. And I'll decline to answer the specifics of that question, but of course there are differences in styles between chairs. But thank you.
Just to give you an insight into I speak to Pete probably a couple of times a week. We have scheduled meetings where we go through what's going on in the business and any priorities that the board has, and then we catch up on an ad lib basis as we need to. Nick, you had a question. Gentleman's just going to bring you a microphone.
My name is Nick Kasapov. I'm a professor at Knowledge Engineering and AI at AUT, previously with University of Otago. And I just have a comment. I just want to congratulate the leadership of the company for taking the company through very difficult period last 2 years, and to showing a very promising plan for the future. Thank you. And one small comment. I saw on the diagram of the history of Pacific Edge that the first year that is shown is 2002 2011. Of course, that was the start in commercial, but let me say that as one of the co-founders of Pacific Edge, we founded that in 2001. And I would like to see this here as well, along with the dotted lines. And I'm sure Professors Perry Guilford, Tony Reeve, and Mike Sullivan, who are also co-founders, will be happy to see that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Nick, it's nice to see you again. I think we met when I first took the job. I'm 100% to blame for that. We do have a variant of the slide that does go all the way back to the founding of 2001 and has the photo of yourselves in the stairwell of the Innovation Centre. But for the purposes of focusing on commercialisation, that's the variant that we've used today. But yeah.
Sir.
We talk a lot about America and how it's funded in America, but how is the rest of the world going, and how is the rest of the world funding? Like in New Zealand, are we as insurance companies funding it, or in Southeast Asia, how is it funded over there?
I think what we'll do, it's a good question. Pete had a slide. Can we just go back? There was a slide that showed Medicare, commercial payers, and that will give you an insight. And I'm going to get Pete to talk down. No, sorry, you've gone too far. Keep going. That one. So, Pete, why don't we talk to that in terms of the model? That's what you're asking about, the model.
But
yeah.
non-US.
And this is the US model, and then we'll come to Asia.
Yeah. Look, so I think I understand the question, and this probably isn't the right slide to look at while I'm answering, but you're essentially asking about commercial payer coverage in countries that are not the United States. And so let's look at New Zealand. Southern Cross, do they pay for the test? No, they don't. I believe one of the other smaller ones, and you'll have to forgive me because I don't know the smaller insurance companies by name, but I believe one of the other ones does. But from the business's perspective, it's not really an incredibly relevant path for us to go down. The relevant path is for us to have these contracts with the DHBs historically, which then became the Te Whatu Ora regions, which are now all under the pathway. That allows us to get all of the New Zealand patients covered for that indication. But let's expand that to Australia. So what are we doing in Australia? Well, we already know, and it is on some slides that I do have in other decks. We omitted it for simplicity today. But in Australia, we know that we cannot get federal reimbursement unless we run the test in Australia. So how do we run the test in Australia? Well, that's our RUO/IVD path. We need to complete that work. We need to have that test run by Sonic or some other testing service in Australia and set that up. It's a totally different business model, but we can absolutely do that. And then we would be eligible for federal reimbursement. And there's an enormous amount of work to show concordance between the test we have and the box we make with the other test that gets run in Australia. But assuming we do all that, we should be able to have a reimbursement path in Australia, and that's the point at which you can get it in every other country. Right now we operate what's called a send-out testing model, and we can contract directly with hospitals, we can contract with governments, we can contract with individuals, or just cash pay kind of thing. So the business development that we are doing through the Asia Pacific is limited and is largely not going to be covered by reimbursement. Singapore might be an exception to that just because of the way that it works. People have health savings accounts that are owned by the individual. So from their perspective, it's cash pay, but it's coming out of something that they were taxed into a health savings account for. So they are probably fine to just pay for the test that way. So every market is different. Those are the ones I know something about. There's plenty that I don't, and I will need expertise to help us go into those markets. But it comes at a time for the business when we go in with the IVDs, and we do that on a targeted and prioritised basis. But we can, in theory, go to any country at that point, differentiated by labelling and the various approval processes that we go through.
Okay. Yep. Okay, cool. Sir.
I arrived a little late, so you might have covered this already. But if the Medicare decision is as favorable as you expect, do you have a calculated amount that the company will receive retroactively from Medicare for the period of time that it wasn't covered? And then, if you know that figure, how will that affect the cash burn rate?
Yeah. So unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, and that's why one of the other things that I did talk about is so important. Novitas has offered us an opportunity to get paid on claim-by-claim coverage with a draft, but we will only get paid when the LCD is finalised from 45 days after the policy is finalised. So if it finalises 1st of November, we'll get paid from 15th of December kind of thing, because it's based on data service and that's just how that works. However, what they have given us is the opportunity to appeal with documentation using the draft coverage as evidence that these patients are eligible, and that's something that we can do for Novitas. That's the thing that I mentioned. We are yet to be successful because the process involves us getting denied and then going back for what's called a redetermination. Different parts of the organisation don't talk to each other as well as they should, but we have no reason to believe that there is a problem with that process. We're just yet to actually make it complete. And so there is... Can I put a number on that? Unfortunately, that would be irresponsible of me at this time. But internally, we're doing everything we can to make that number as big as possible.
Okay. Grant.
Another couple of questions from online. So this is from Mingyan Chan. The draft LCD sets out a list of patient eligibility criteria that must be met before the test qualifies for coverage. For example, the patient has not undergone the same or a similar test within the previous 6 months. Do these criteria align with how Cxbladder products are actually or should be used in clinical practice? And would that restrict the use cases comparing to the previous LCD?
The short answer is, while we have some comments into Novitas about some of those specific eligibility criteria, by and large, triage, which is what this affects, is a single-use diagnostic test at a point in time, and so for a clinically separate bout of hematuria, we expect to be able to use the test again. And so, but we could not use it repeatedly, but that's not the intended use of our test. So for us, we meet that requirement and have no major issue with it.
Gentleman here had a question.
Hi, my name is Sijur. It's probably easy to call me Kevin. I'm a shareholder. My question is to Peter. With the AUA guideline change in 2025 and this new Novitas LCD that's setting new policy, could you please give an indication as to the dynamics with which the practicing clinicians would align themselves to that guideline? Would you expect them to do that quickly, or was that something that they will slowly or eventually converge to? Thank you.
That is a great question, and this is where there's a little bit of devil in the details, a little bit of nuance. So it is important to remember that even though there are now, we have established for the first time biomarker policy for use in microhematuria patients, and it is for intermediate risk patients. But it is also important, and so that is a huge milestone, and we don't want to take anything away from that. It is also important to know that frontline, they basically say for appropriately counselled intermediate risk patients. The recommendation from the AUA is still to use a cystoscopy, but this makes it medically reasonable and necessary if they choose an alternative. That's the power of the guideline. So many urologists may still say, I'm just going to keep doing what I was doing. And so we are at the early stages of changing clinician practice. Those that are most familiar with the test and familiar with the value, and recognize actually that it's in their own interests economically to not waste time on the patients who are unlikely to have disease. Right, until they've really been educated on all of the points, they're going to continue. They may continue with the old standard of care, but it is our job to change that. There's a whole lot ahead of us to do so, but at the moment, it is not a hard requirement to change as dictated by guidelines, so you would expect adoption to be more based on our effort than on guidelines being directive.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Stephen Main. So there's two parts to this. Thank you for offering the best practice hybrid AGM today. And could you please publish a full copy of the AGM webcast on your website, not just the presentation slides as has occurred in the past? So I can answer that one. The previous AGMs are actually on the Pacific Edge YouTube site. So you can find the 2025 copy of the AGM there, and you will see the 2026. We'll put that up there as well. Next part of the question is, are we getting good value from being dual listed, paying listing fees to both ASX and NZX? What is the split between Australia and New Zealand and the rest of the world in terms of the share registered by both shares and shareholders? So I'll answer the shares and shareholders. We have 5% of our shareholders based overseas. Most of those are within Australia. And that represents 2% of our share base, so predominantly New Zealand based.
Are we getting good value? Look, I think this is one of the things that that we look at. The decision to have a dual listing obviously predates me, but it makes sense to me to have a listing outside of the country where you are going to be growing. We're going to be growing a global company from New Zealand. Yeah, and the pools of capital that are available are bigger outside of the country, so there is logic to having a second listing. In terms of value, that is a hard thing to define. At the moment, we've got the vast majority, as Grant just said, of our shareholders here in New Zealand. But as the company has removed the sort of the regulatory overhang, I think we're going to get on the radar of more people. Pete has been in conversation and communication as recently 2 weeks ago with contingents of investors from Australia. One of the things that we are going to be looking at as we go forward and as we can focus on growing the business is to get the story out there. And one of the first places that we will go and visit to get our story out there is Australia, where we already have a listing and an opportunity for people to be able to invest in the country, in the company from the Australian market. So the question on value is something that we'll review as time goes by, but it makes sense to have exposure to another capital market with deep resources.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Is it also true that by being ASX listed, international fund managers would be able to invest in Pacific Edge, whereas they may not have a mandate to invest in NZX companies because our market's too small?
Yeah, look, when I ran portfolios, we didn't invest a lot of money in New Zealand simply because the liquidity issue. So Australia was a market that we did spend a bit of time looking at. You find that people are more concerned about the opportunity than they are about the destination of the money. New Zealand is a well-respected, well-regulated capital market. Yeah, very transparent, very well regulated, very fair in terms of overseas ownership rights. But it's a market that is, it would probably be the top 4 or 5 companies by market capitalisation that would attract most foreign investment. And the way that companies can get the exposure to additional capital is to take their listing and put it in another market. And you've seen that happen a number of times with New Zealand companies looking for additional capital and additional exposure. They move to a bigger pool. We've kept a dual listing.
Great, thank you. We only have one other question, and that was from Andrew Ott, and that was around Assure MDX. But Pete, I think you covered that pretty well in your competitor analysis, so I think we can move on.
We're done? Okay, cool. Thank you, Grant, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your questions. Right, so look, now we come to the formal the formal part of the meeting in terms of the shareholder resolutions, which have been outlined in the notice of meeting. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions on each matter being put to the shareholders. For the sake of good order, questions raised at that point should relate directly to the specific resolution being considered. So when I call for questions, if you shareholders in the room could raise your hand, we'll give you a microphone, and if you could state your name, whether you're a shareholder, a proxy holder or a corporate representative. Only shareholders, proxies or corporate representatives are entitled to ask questions. Online attendees can submit questions by clicking the Ask a Question button in the virtual meeting platform. Now, as part of today's formal business, as you know, I am standing for election by shareholders, and when we reach that item, I'm going to hand to my board colleague and friend Tony Barclay, who's the chair of our audit and risk meeting, to conduct that part of the business. So let's go to the resolutions. Now, a poll is going to be held on each of the 6 resolutions. Shareholders joining us today should have received a shareholder voting card when you registered. If you are a shareholder and have not registered and you wish to vote, you can go to the registration desk outside and the MUFG staff will assist you. If you mark your voting intention for each resolution on the voting card, and then I imagine, Grant, and I'm looking at you, is there a box or something that people can post their cards in on the way out? Yep, there is. Okay, so you have, I think, 3 choices. You can vote for, against or abstain. It's the same for the people voting online. People voting online, you can use the virtual meeting guide or use the helpline if you require specific assistance. Voting is going to remain open until 5 minutes after the conclusion of the meeting, and the results of the vote will be published on the NZX and the ASX and on the company's website following the meeting. Each resolution is an ordinary resolution, which means it must be approved by a simple majority of the votes cast by shareholders entitled to vote and voting on that resolution. There are no shareholder voting restrictions on resolutions 1 to 3 or on resolution 6. There are voting restrictions on resolutions 4 and 5 as outlined in the notice of meeting. I'll remind you of those restrictions, or Tony will, including how they apply to directors appointed as proxies when we reach the relevant resolutions. The outcome of valid proxy votes received before the start of this meeting will be displayed for your information after the voting on all 6 resolutions. So, next. Right. Okay, this is a very standard resolution, and it concerns the remuneration of our auditor, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Now, under the Companies Act, PricewaterhouseCoopers is automatically reappointed as auditor at this meeting. The resolution before shareholders authorises the board to fix PricewaterhouseCoopers' remuneration for the coming year. The board unanimously recommends that shareholders vote in favour of Resolution 1, and I now propose that shareholders authorise the directors to fix the auditor's remuneration for the coming year. Are there any questions on auditor's remuneration? You have one?
We have one online. This comes from Stephen Main. PwC has been your auditor for more than a decade. Whilst 5-yearly partner rotation is required under Australian and New Zealand law, there is no mandatory tendering after 10 years as now occurs in the UK. When did we last tender the external audit, and when are we most likely to run a competitive tender for the job?
Okay. So, Grant, can you answer when we last tendered for the auditor, please?
I cannot actually recall. It hasn't been in the last 6 years since I've been here. We did discuss it, but at the time the business was going through a lot of uncertainty, and we felt that continuity of an auditor was probably the best course of action.
Yeah. Okay. Look, my view, I'm happy to put it on an agenda for the board to discuss, and we would take advice on that. We look at auditors as an important contributor to the numbers that we make public. Obviously, the integrity of those numbers is essential for any business, and it's really important that shareholders have confidence, which is why we go with a well-established firm who has served us very well for more than a decade. We do ensure fresh eyes are brought to the audit through the rotation, which is required by law, but it's good practice anyway of the partner in charge of the audit. But look, we're very much an open book and very transparent. I'm happy to put the matter on an agenda, maybe at the AFRC, Tony, for discussion. We can take advice, and we will see where we end up. Next question. That's it? Okie dokie. So, I sort of feel like there might be a countdown clock or something, to let people vote. But there's not countdown. Okay. Let's move on to Resolution 2. Now, Resolution 2 is the re-election of our Deputy Chair, Brian Williams, as a Director. In accordance with NZX listing rule 2.7.1, Brian retires by rotation and, being eligible, has offered himself for re-election. Brian was first appointed to the board in June 2013. He is an internationally recognised cancer researcher and research administrator with significant business and governance experience. He provides the board with extensive knowledge of Pacific Edge and the healthcare sector. The board carefully considered the application of the independence factors in the NZX Corporate Governance Code to Brian during his 13-year tenure as a director. The notice of meeting sets out the board's assessment of that tenure. Amongst other things, the board is satisfied that the length of Brian's service as a director has not compromised his ability to apply independent judgment to matters before the board in the interests of all shareholders. Accordingly, the board has determined that he remains an independent director for the purpose of the listing rules. The board, other than Brian, who abstains, unanimously supports his re-election, and I now propose that Brian Williams, who retires by rotation at the conclusion of this meeting and is eligible for re-election, be re-elected as a director of the company. And I invite Brian, Grant, if we have him online, to address the meeting.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Simon. I'd just like to begin by reiterating some of the thanks that we've had from our shareholders for their support over the past 3 years. It's been a really very difficult process that we've gone through, and we really appreciate how much they've continued to support us, as exemplified by the latest cap raise. So thank you very much for this. I would be very excited to be able to continue my appointment as a director of the company and as of vice chair. We've got an exciting journey ahead of us, and I look forward to working with my fellow board members and Pete and his executive team on this journey. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any questions on this resolution? No? Okay, great. Look, so you can now mark your voting cards in the way that you wish to vote, and I am going to step away from the lectern and hand to my friend Tony Barclay.
Try and do a little dance here and not get in each other's way.
We'll just get out of the way.
Right. Thank you, Simon. Resolution 3, thank you, concerns the election of Simon Flood as a director of Pacific Edge. Simon was appointed by the board on 4 December 2025 and assumed the role of chair on 19 December 2025. Under NZX listing rule 2.7.1, a director appointed by the board must retire at the next annual meeting and may then offer themselves for election. Accordingly, Simon retires and, being eligible, has offered himself for election.
Simon has more than 25 years of experience in the global investment management industry, including senior investment and business leadership roles in London, Hong Kong and Singapore. His experience spans listed equities, fixed income, commercialisation of intellectual property, early stage investment and governance. He also has a long-standing interest in the global healthcare industry, hence Simon being here today. The board has determined that Simon is an independent director for the purposes of listing rules, and the board, other than Simon who abstains, unanimously supports his election. I now propose that Simon Flood, who retires at the conclusion of this meeting in accordance with NZX listing rule 2.7.1 and is eligible for election, be elected as a director of the company, and I invite Simon to address the meeting. Again.
He's back. Thank you, Tony. Ladies and gentlemen, just a couple of words, brief words from me. Look, this is my first annual shareholders meeting, and I became a director and then was elected chair in December of last year. I'm an investor by training. I've lived and worked most of my professional life overseas. I spent 15 years in London and then spent 10 years in Asia. In that time, I was trained as an analyst, then an investment manager. I ran portfolios, I then ran teams of people who ran portfolios, then ran divisions, then countries, regions, and then came back to New Zealand. I love the markets, and we're a listed company. I love the healthcare sector because it's actually a sector that does stuff to improve people's lives. And so the work that is being done by Pacific Edge, started by Nick, continued by a number of others that have followed him, and carried by Pete, Grant, and our board, is important, and it makes a difference to people's lives. And the reason that sort of bladder cancer is an important cancer is that there are a lot of people who don't seek treatment until it's too late. There are a lot of people who don't like cystoscopies because they're uncomfortable, they're invasive, and they're sometimes painful. Pacific Edge's product, backed by scientific evidence that has been built over many, many years, offers a cost-effective solution to that market. And when I was offered the opportunity, I saw some key building blocks, the scientific evidence which confirms the validity of the products. We have a listing which gives us access to shareholders and capital markets. We have a good management team. We have a very good board, and I was very excited by what I saw in front of me. I'm a very sort of numerate numbers person. I love business, and I love the healthcare sector probably above all else. My disciplines around money and how you spend it and how you drive returns is something that I've learned all the way through my career in terms of identifying businesses that can create and deliver shareholder value. So I hope that the skills that I have learned and the experiences that I have had will be of use to Pacific Edge as it writes the next chapter. And I hope that you will be able to give me your vote today. So I'm very happy to take any questions, but that's me. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Simon has already asked whether there's any questions, but I guess just while he has stood away from the chair, just one last opportunity. Nothing online. Okay. Thank you. Please mark your cards in the way you wish to vote. Per Simon, I'll just give 2 or 3 seconds. Right, Resolution 4. The next resolution concerns the payment of director remuneration to Simon Flood. At the 2025 annual shareholders meeting, shareholders approved an increase in the non-executive director remuneration pool for FY26.
The increased component of FY26 director remuneration was to be satisfied in shares rather than cash, and shares were issued to the then directors in August 2025. When former Chair Chris Gallagher retired on 18 December 2025, he repaid $12,699 to the company under the agreed repayment mechanism. Simon had been appointed to the board on 4 December and became Chair on 19 December. But the 2025 shareholder approval did not contemplate the payment of the increased remuneration component to a replacement director, either in cash or by way of the issue of shares. Simon's total entitlement to director remuneration for FY26 is $47,616. Of that amount, $34,918 has been paid in cash and $12,699 has been accrued but remains unpaid. Resolution 4 therefore seeks shareholder approval for the company to pay Simon the outstanding $12,699 in cash. If approved, the company intends to make the payment within a week of this meeting. The payment of this amount, if approved by shareholders, will not result in any increased accounting cost to the company, as the accrual was included in the company's most recent audited financial statements. Nor will it result in any net cash outflow, as the proposed payment to Simon is equal to the repayment received from the former chair. The board, other than Simon who abstains, unanimously recommends that shareholders vote in favour of Resolution 4. There is a voting restriction on this resolution as detailed in the notice of meeting, which provides that Simon and his associated parties cannot vote in favour of this resolution. As a result of that restriction, where Simon has been appointed by a shareholder as a discretionary proxy on Resolution 4, including in his role as chair of the meeting, he will not vote the shareholders' shares on the resolution. Wow. I now propose that the payment in cash of $12,699 to Simon Flood, being unpaid director remuneration accrued in respect of the period from 19 December 2025 to 31 March 2026, be approved for all purposes, including NZX Listing Rule 2.11 or 11.1. Are there any questions on the resolution?
Yep, we do have one online. So this is from Stephen Main. If we're having a special resolution just to approve a small payment to the new chair, will the chair undertake to lead a board discussion on whether Pacific Edge should voluntarily follow the law in Australia where we're dual listed and put the remuneration report up for a non-binding vote at next year's AGM? The likes of Fletcher Building and Xero already voluntarily do this, and it's standard practice in an English-speaking world, making New Zealand look like a governance backwater by not adopting this measure.
I think I'll hand that to the real chair.
Okay, thank you. Grant, did you say it was Stephen? Stephen, thank you, Stephen, for the question. Look, we want to follow best practice. We do in everything that we do. So I would be very happy to table that for consideration, take appropriate advice, and do what we think is the right thing. That's the way we run the business.
Any further questions online, Grant? Okay, thank you. And again, please mark your voting cards in the way you wish to vote, remembering to take into account the voting restrictions discussed which apply to this resolution. Resolution 5. Resolution 5 concerns the ratification of shares issued in connection with Pacific Edge's recent capital raising in reliance of the 15% placement provisions of the NZX listing rules. In May 2026, Pacific Edge announced a capital raising comprising a placement and a retail offer at an issue price of 17 cents per share. The placement was completed on 15 May and the retail offer on 4 June. In total, 152,561,001 shares were issued in reliance on the company's 15% placement capacity under NZX Listing Rule 4.5.1, comprising shares issued under the placement, certain shares issued under the retail offer, and shares issued in consideration for professional services provided in connection with the placement and retail offer. I feel I need to take a breath there. The purpose of Resolution 5 is to ratify those share issues. If the resolution is passed, it will effectively replenish Pacific Edge's 15% placement capacity, giving the company its full capacity under Listing Rule 4.5.1 to issue shares without prior shareholder approval where the board considers it appropriate and the requirements of the listing rules are satisfied. If Resolution 5 is not passed, Pacific Edge's ability to raise equity quickly will remain constrained until its placement capacity refreshes within 12 months after the relevant component of the capital raising. For example, to the extent that the company's 15% capacity was used to issue shares under the placement, that capacity will refresh on 16 May 2027. The board, other than Simon Flood, Anatole Masvin and Brian Williams, who each abstained because they or their associated persons were issued shares under Listing Rule 4.5.1 in the placement, unanimously recommends that shareholders vote in favour of Resolution 5. Again, there are voting restrictions on Resolution 5 as set out in the Notice of Meeting, which provide that recipients of shares issued in reliance under Listing Rule 4.5.1 and their associated persons cannot vote in favour of the resolution. The voting restrictions apply to Simon, Anatole and Brian as recipients of shares under the placement. This means that where any of them has been appointed by a shareholder as a discretionary proxy on Resolution 5, they will not vote the shareholder's shares on the resolution. I now propose that the issue of 152,561,001 shares under NZX Listing Rule 4.5.1, as described in the Notice of Meeting, be approved and ratified for all purposes, including NZX Listing Rule 4.5.1c. Are there any questions in the room on the resolution? Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hypothetically, does this mean, if it's approved, that the company has greater freedom to pursue a strategic relationship with a larger US investor, for example?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it basically gives the company flexibility to look at its capital requirements without needing to come to shareholders.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yes, we have another question online from Stephen Main. Our shares have almost tripled since July 2025 when we did a 16 million placement at New Zealand 10 cents, which was followed by a 5 million SPP, which brought in 4.7 million. The pricing at the time was a 22% premium on the previous close of 8.2 cents, and the stock is now at 23 cents Australian. With the benefit of hindsight, shouldn't this have been a pro rata offer to minimise dilution of existing holders? If we raise capital again, will the Chair undertake to do as a pro rata rising, which treats all shareholders equally and doesn't need shareholder approval like this resolution?
I'm happy to give this a crack, by the way. Look, thank you for the question, Stephen. Look, when we undertook that capital raise the previous time to this latest one, there was reasonable uncertainty in terms of where the business was at. There was no CAC scheduled. We didn't have the draft LCD. So, you know, whenever we look at raising capital, we look at what is best for the business at the time. And both that raise and the raise we've recently done, we've attempted through the SPP to make it fair to everybody and try and make shareholders have the ability to be whole in terms of their percentage ownership of the business. So if we were, which we haven't committed to clearly, raise capital in the future, we would look at all options in terms of how we might raise that capital and in all ways try and be fair to all shareholders. I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that as chair of the Capcom at all, Anatole? Or?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, I know I'm not voting in this, but I think it's important to lay out that, you know, as a board and as a CAP committee, we have, you know, we absolutely hand on heart try to make any issue as fair as possible on a pro rata basis. And our first preference was absolutely to have a rights issue. Unfortunately, in the New Zealand market, it's very hard to get that underwritten, and especially when you've got some uncertainty. And we had, knowing, with reasonable confidence that we've got a draft LCD coming, we had pushed out that capital raise as far as we possibly could, probably too far, for the comfort of directors and the requirements of us for having runway for 6 and 12 months as per the listing requirements. So we went down that road as much as we possibly could, and that when we did, and it's a bit of a bugbear of mine in the New Zealand market, is that most issues currently are done by this placement and then SPP mechanism, which gets to a quasi sort of rights issue pro rata solution in most instances, and we spent an inordinate amount of time trying to get to that fairness situation, which is why the institutions and the large shareholders really bore the brunt of trying to put their hand up for the pro rata-ish large chunk of that last issue, and then blow me down, we get the good news, and then everyone wants to get involved in the SPP. So we did increase the SPP to an amount which would have been far more than we would have naturally raised if we hadn't had that information. But we were very careful to allocate those shares as close as we could on a pro rata basis, so that everyone right down the shareholding was able to get their pro rata allocation. However, we did bump into a real problem in that we weren't able to do the SPP, I'm pretty sure I'm saying, in Australia. So it did disadvantage Australian small shareholders who weren't able to participate in that. And that is something, a little, it doesn't affect a lot of people, but it definitely affects the person who answered the question, I think. And, we did spend a lot of time trying to rectify that, but weren't able to come up with a solution. So 100% we would much rather have done it as a rights issue. I think, the key to this is don't expect any more capital raising, coming from the current shareholders. That's not our number one, source of future capital. But I really do believe having the ability, resetting the cap to the 15% and giving the company the ability to raise capital through a strategic partner or through a different avenue or through a placement or something else is, creates a lot more value and certainty to the business. So, I hope that sort of answers the question.
Thank you very much for that additional colour, Anatole. Any other question online? Thank you, Grant. Okay. So there being no further questions online, thank you again, everyone. Please mark your cards, voting cards in the... No, I'm in the wrong place here. Thank you. Please mark your voting cards the way you wish to vote, taking into account the voting restrictions applying to this resolution. And that completes the resolutions concerning Simon. I will now hand the chair back to him for the remainder of the meeting. Thank you. Actually, I'll let you get out before I try and get in. Thanks, Tony.
Okay, thank you, Tony. So our final resolution, Resolution 6, ratification of share purchase plan share issue. Resolution 6 concerns the ratification of the shares issued under the retail offer in reliance on the share purchase plan provisions of the NZX listing rules. Pacific Edge issued 59,998,716 shares under the retail offer on the 4th of June 2026 in reliance on listing rule 4.3.1c. Resolution 6 seeks shareholder ratification of that issue. If the resolution is passed, it will effectively replenish the dollar value of shares that may be issued to each shareholder under the share purchase plan rule before the 5th of June 2027, so that Pacific Edge would again be able to issue up to $50,000 of shares to each shareholder under that rule, subject to the listing rules. If Resolution 6 is not passed, any further offer structured as a share purchase plan before the 5th of June 2027 may be constrained, limiting shareholder participation and potentially the amount of capital that could be raised. The board, other than Anna, Sarah and Tony, who each abstained because they or their associated persons were issued shares under the retail offer in reliance on Listing Rule 4.3.1c, unanimously recommends that shareholders vote in favour of Resolution 6. There are no shareholder voting restrictions on Resolution 6. I now propose that the issue of 59,998,716 shares under NZX Listing Rule 4.3.1c, as described in the Notice of Meeting, be approved and ratified for all purposes, including paragraph A of the definition of the share purchase plan in the NZX Listing Rules. Are there any questions from shareholders about this resolution?
Yes, there is one online for Andrew Ott. It's a shame that the New Zealand rules, NZX rules, meant that many shareholders were limited in participating in the 2026 share purchase plan. Could directors do their best to avoid this problem in the future? I think Anatol's discussed this during the last answer, so hopefully that answers your question, Andrew.
Cool. Thank you, Grant. I agree. I think Anatol's comments did that we did our absolute level best to make sure our shareholders were able to be kept whole. Yeah. So if there are no further questions, please mark your voting cards in the way that you wish to vote. Okay. That completes the consideration of the 6 resolutions. As mentioned earlier, the online voting platform will remain open for 5 minutes after the close of this meeting. At this time, I would like to advise the outcome of proxy votes that were lodged in respect of each of the resolutions before the meeting commenced. I will not read the proxy results for each resolution, which you'll be relieved about, but they are shown on the screen now. The share registrar will now move through the room to collect voting cards. For shareholders online, please ensure your electronic voting card is submitted within the voting period. Good practice for the 7th of November. Get those votes in. Okay, next slide, general business. I would like to give shareholders the opportunity to ask questions or raise any other general business that may properly be brought before this meeting. Shareholders online can continue to provide questions through the portal, and we will also address questions from the room. Are there any further questions from shareholders? Grant, do we have any online? No, we don't. Right. So if that is the end of the questions, I would like to thank everyone who has attended today, both virtually and in person, and to thank our shareholders for your ongoing support of Pacific Edge. I now declare the 2026 Annual Shareholders Meeting closed. And for those of you here in this room, I hope that you will join the board and management for some refreshments, which I think is just outside. Is that where we're going? Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.